Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's The Prince. And today we wrap up the third section of The Prince, which is kind of like dividing the Prince into logical conceptions. This third section was the question of qualities, right? We last chapter we ended up with faith, but in fact one would have thought that the last chapter should have ended the discussion in a sense. But no, he goes back to this question. It kind of it readdresses the love and better love, feared or loved argument. Remember, he Boyd hated, right? Which he talked about, and this idea that a prince ought to avoid being hated and contempt. And this is the chapter this is one of the longest chapters in the Prince. This has 21 paragraphs. That is something interesting. It is one of the longest chapters. I think it may be the longest, if I'm correct in that sense. I don't have my notes with me, so I think it is the longest chapter. It's one of the longest chapters of the Prince. Um, uh, Arms by Others is 15. 3 goes pretty long too, and 3 is 17. So I think 21 is was it 25? After this, I think the longest chapter will be 26. Yeah, 104, 26, 25 again is 9. So it may be the longest chapter in the Prince. Book, chapter of the Prince. It's the longest thing. So we're going to be here for a long time today. All right, so I'm sorry about that. You're going to hearing the fans and the things. I hope you can hear me, and there's not a problem about this. The fan in the background is simply because otherwise it's this room would be not breathable and existable. Um, what about this? Avoiding contempt and hatred. This is again what it is. Now, but because I've spoken of the most important qualities mentioned above, about the qualities, right? I wish to discuss others briefly under these generalities. So therefore, it's going to quick it out. He says, I I wish to discuss them briefly on these generalities. One, that a prince should think, as has in part been said above, of avoiding those things which make him hateful, and contemptible. And when he avoids this, he will have done his part, and he will find no danger in the other vices. So, of all those things, right, of the qualities mentioned above, those qualities, he should think, well, what I should think, as he has been said above, of avoiding those things which make him hateful and contemptible. So, whatever those qualities that, and he will done his part, and he will find no danger in the other vices. As long as the vice does not make you hated or contemptible, then it won't matter. What makes him hated above all, as I said, is rapaciousness. In other words, rapaciousness, taking the things of others, right? Violently taking the things of others, and the usurpation of goods, and the women of his subjects. In other words, don't touch their women, don't touch their goods and women. That goes over the previous chapter discussed that. So that what makes him hated above all is rapaciousness and the usurpation of goods, of taking the goods of the women and the subjects, right? He should abstain from these. For the universality of men live contently when neither their goods nor their honor are taken. And one then has to only to combat the ambition of the few, who may be restrained in many modes and with ease. In other words, it's a very interesting point. He says then long as you don't get, what, don't touch their goods or their honor, the men, Don't be rapacious and avoid usurpation of goods, of their goods and women. Men are what the university of men live contented as long as their goods or nor their honor are taken. Whereas the ambition of the few, well, then after that you only have to care about the ambitions of the few, who are what, and these can be restrained in many modes and with ease. He the prince, is made contemptible by being held to be changeable, light, effeminate, pusillanimous, the small souled, irresolute. And from these the prince ought to guard himself as from a reef, and to contrive that his actions one will recognize great spiritedness, gravity, and strength. Now, what is this? We're held to be, five things that you should now avoid. The fives, right? Five, and four, and five, right? That was the previous chapter. Here now we get and then another five, right? Here we get things that contemptible, changeable, light, effeminate, pusillanimous, irresolute. That and the reef is like underneath the water, the reefs that they're underneath. A ship scaling through here needs to, you hit a reef, you sink. These are reefs that makes you contemptible. The people will see you. People who look at you, you have contempt for you because you're changeable, light, effeminate. Then, therefore, you should, and contrive that his actions one will recognize greatness, spiritus, gravity, and strength. For as for private affairs of his subjects, he should will that his judgment be irrevocable, and see to it that he maintains such an opinion of firmness that no one thinks of deceiving him or getting around him. So therefore, as for the private affairs of his subjects, he should will that his judgments be irrevocable, and see that he maintains such an opinion of his firmness that the subject understands, and that no one thinks of deceiving him or getting around the prince. In other words, you can't deceive him, that he can't be deceived, and he can't get gone around. That he's firm, his decisions are not, it's resolute. He's not going to equivocate, not going to change his mind, um, uh, and that is an opinion of his firmness, that he won't, is not wavering, he's not a hesitator, and that you cannot deceive or get around him. Right? That's the first paragraph. Second paragraph here. A prince who maintains such an opinion about himself will be much reputed, and one conspires with difficulty against one who has such a reputation. He will be attacked with difficulty, provided it is understood that he is an excellent man and is revered by his own. In other words, if he's these things, if he's capacious by mind, he doesn't. No, he has not done those. He's avoided those things, and he's perceived in this previous matter. He has an opinion of himself. A prince who maintains an opinion about himself will be reputed, and it's going to be difficult to consult against him. Why? Provided as long as he's really an excellent man, he knows to be able to make judgments and knows what is right, and is revered by his own and not hated. He's revered by his own. For a prince ought to have two fears. One fear rises from within and concern his subjects. The other arises from without and concerns external power. So there's two fears. Internal, one within, one without. Internal powers, the subjects, and the external powers. One defends oneself from the latter fear, so the external powers, with good arms and good friends. So with good arms and good friends. And if one has good arms, one will always have good friends. In other words, in other words, so the first external affairs, good arms, and good friends. And good arms is more important because good arms will means you'll have friends, good friends. Okay, good arms are good friends, and if one has good arms, one will always have good friends. And internal affairs will be stable if external. In other words, internal affairs will be stable if external affairs are stable, provided that the former have not been already been disturbed by conspiracy. So as long as you haven't created a conspiracy, in other words, internal affairs. In other words, internal affairs will be stable if external affairs are stable, provided that the former internal affairs have not been disturbed by some conspiracy. And even if external affairs are in motion, if a prince has so ordered himself and lived as I've said, and if he does not falter, he will always sustain every attack, as I said, of Nasbid the Spartan did. Pardon. Oh God, I was gonna try to stop this video to sneeze, but I missed that. Oops. So pardon. And that was in chapter 9. He talked about that Nasbid, about Nasbid, about this. And what is 9? 9 is, if I remember correctly, the civic principle, right? He was able to maintain. He was a civic example of a civic principle. He was able to hold siege. He had enough resources. This idea of the civic principle back in chapter 9. So even if there is someone external affairs are in motion, if you've altered your civil order correctly and you've done arms and preparations, you can sustain every attack, as Nabis did. But concerning his subjects, if external affairs are not in motion, he has to fear that they may secretly conspire. And from this, the prince secures himself sufficiently by avoiding becoming hated and despised, and in keeping the people satisfied with him. Uh, uh, all of which is necessary for him to do has been said above at length. In other words, don't touch their women, don't touch other things. In other words, don't become hated. In other words, he said, I told you how to avoid this. So as long as you avoid becoming hated and despised and keeping the people satisfied with them. And I've dealt with these already. And one of the most potent remedies a prince has against conspiracies, so this is the chapter on conspiracies, this is why it's people that talk about this, is not to be hated by the universality of mankind. In other words, how do you fight conspiracy? Well, make sure not everyone, the universality of by everyone. Don't be hated by everyone, because he who conspires always believes that the death of the prince will satisfy the people. Right? In other words, if you're hated by everyone, if I kill you, no one's going to complain. Okay, but if he instead believes that it will offend them, the people, the many, then he will not be able to pluck up his courage to take such a part. For the difficulties on the part of conspirators are infinite. So the conspirators I want to remove you. I want to get your power. This is an ambitious person who wants to get you. This addresses the question of the ambitions of the many, the ambitions of the few. And they're easy to resolve. And they're easy to resolve is because why conspiracies are conspiracies. Well, as long as you're not hated, it's going to be very difficult. They're not going to be that brave to take you on, because they may fear the retribution. If you're loved and you kill them, the people might take vengeance on that, right? That's the whole point. They wouldn't be plucked up their courage to take part. For the difficulties on the part of conspirators are infinite. And one sees by experience that there have been many conspiracies, and few have come to a good end, because conspirators cannot act alone, and he can get companions only from those whom he believes are malcontents. And you're discovering, and upon your discovering your mind to one who is a malcontent, you immediately give him the matter whereby he may become content. For by revealing the conspiracy, he can hope that every advantage may be his. Right. So therefore, that's this is that weird line here. That, in other words, that one sees by experiences the conspiracies don't really work. Why? Because then you can't conspiracies need many people. But then what happens? That usually you turn to malcontents. But then if I know I can catch you as a malcontent. I go to them and make. In other words, upon the yours here is an interesting one. I think it is. What is the your here? It's the second personal familiar. So, in other words, he moves from the. This is the familiar. Your upon your. In other words, upon your discovering your mind to one who is malcontent. You discover in your mind the one who's malcontent. You immediately give him the matter where he becomes content. For by revealing the conspiracy, he can get it. He can hope that every advantage may be his. Right. So he's going to snitch. So I'm malcontent, but if I can tell the prince, okay, I'm not malcontent, maybe the prince will give me advantage. This is why the dangers of conspiracies. Um, so every advantage being his, such that seeing the certain gain on his side and seeing how dubious and full of danger is the other, one needs must be a rare friend indeed, or else must be wholly an obstinate enemy of the prince, if he is to keep faith with you. In other words, the only person who's going to, most people are going to look at their advantage. And that the fact that I know that this is and that this gives me my information about the conspiracy will, if I tell the prince, I'll get a benefit. The prince will benefit me. So, as long as the prince is, the prince, you knew, but you didn't know. Oh, not killing the messenger. No, you you reward these people. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, you're unhappy? Well, why are you? Okay, I know who's unhappy, and therefore I go to them. Oh, Bob, I know you're unhappy. How can I help you? Can you help me somehow? Yeah, here, these guys are trying to get you. Okay, yeah, thank you. In other words, they must either be someone who is a rare friend indeed. That's why, remember he said about friends earlier, that the friends you buy, you can't spend when you need to spend them. Okay, therefore this must be a true. The only friends you can spend is the true friend. So it's a rare friend indeed that you're going to still stick with you in these rare things, or an enemy, or what the guy I hate. I hate that guy as much as you do. Right? If he's going to keep faith with you. Now this next paragraph, and to reduce this to brief terms, I say that on the part of conspirators, there's nothing but fear, jealousy, and the anticipation of punishment that terrifies him. So, fear, jealousy, anticipation of punishment that terrifies the conspirator. But on the part of the prince, there is majesty of the principate, the laws, the protection of friends, and the state will defend. So, there's, in other words, notice this: what there are protection, there are the majesty of the power of the majesty of the principate, the laws themselves, the protection of friends, and the state. Interesting. All of which will defend him, such that joining popular goodwill to all these things. In other words, you have those things, right? The magistracy, the protection of the friends and the state, plus goodwill. It is impossible that anyone be so bold to conspire. And where ordinarily a conspirator must fear before the execution of his evil, and in this case he must also fear what will follow from the excess, having the people as an enemy. And because of this, he cannot hope to find any refuge. In other words, he has no hope. In other words, the first is already he has what? Fear of being caught, fear of his situation, jealousy of the power of their emperor, the prince, and anticipation of the punishment, the punishment of what happens when he fails or doesn't succeed. What the other thing is what? Well, if the people are on his side, these things, the prince has all these things, plus popular goodwill, the conspirators damned, because why? All these three magnifies those three things that conspirators are dealt with, right? Reduced brief terms, right? But fear, jealousy, and the anticipation of punishment terrifies that these things continue, right? Um, and where ordinary conspirators must fear the execution of his evil, and in this case, he must also fear what will follow, having the people for an enemy. And because of this, he cannot find any refuge. Next paragraph. One can give infinite examples of this matter, but I will content myself with only one which occurred within memory of our fathers. Right? So I can give many of them, but I'm going to give one, memory of our father, one recent one, right? Recent time. When Monsieur Annibal Benativo, Prince of Bologna, and grandfather of the present Annibal, was killed by the Kencensi, who had conspired against him, and no one remained of his house except Messer Giovanni, who was in saddling clothes. Right. Immediately after the homicide, the people rose up and killed the Canicelli. That act proceeded from the popular goodwill, the popular goodwill which the house of Benevogoli had in those times, such that no one of that house remaining in Bologna could rule the state with Annibale dead, and having an indication that there has been in Florence one born of the Benevogli um, who had until then been taken to be the son of a blacksmith. The Bolognese came to him in Florence and gave him the government of their city. It was governed by him until Messer Giovanni became age to govern. The child that was the age to govern. They went to this man of low birth, but he had the right family ties, right family blood. So this is a very interesting account here. This is on note 3. Annabelle Benetivgovi, I can't ever say these dying names, was killed in 1445, and Santi Bentivogli was presumed natural son of the cousin of Annabelle, ruled until 1462 when Giovanni came of age. See, this is found in Florentine Histories, book 6, 9, I think chapters 9 through 10, right? In the account of the Florentine histories, what emerges is the crudity. Okay, the crudelty. I can never say this word. I'm losing. I've been away from English language too long. I'm in a Polish environment. I'm very the credulity of the people, their deep desire, brought about by a jealous factionalism, to have, however slim, a connection to the blood to which they had been accustomed to. Machiavelli remarks that Santini was not only honored but almost adored. Right? That this is In other words, even though that this was that the blood was so tied that even he was honored, he was adored. Right, this blacksmith's son tied to the line. Right. So what is this? So therefore, that is, and he's able to govern. It's example. It's modern example. Imagine this. This is the way that if you're loved by the people, that they will not prevent this. In other words, if Saddam Hussein was really loved, if um, uh, in other words, even Gaddafi, you, you have nothing to fear. They would even take some cousin of Gaddafi or grandchild of Gaddafi to make him a prince. You understand? They're, they they will insist on it. This is not happening because why? They didn't make themselves loved. I conclude, therefore, that a prince ought to take little account of conspirators when he has the goodwill of the people. But when they are his enemies and bear him hatred, he ought to fear everyone and everyone. Okay. So therefore, if the people are your enemies, you have to fear everyone and everyone. They are his enemies and bear him hatred. Okay. And well ordered states and wise princes have with all diligence thought of not making the great desperate. In other words, so therefore, a well ordered state and wise princes have with all diligence thoughts of not making the great desperate. Okay. Don't make the great desperate, and of satisfying the people and keeping them content. For if one is, for this is one of the most important matters that belongs to a prince. So don't what? Don't make the great desperate, and satisfy the people and keep them content. Among the kingdoms of our time, which are well ordered and governed, is that of France, and in it are to be found infinite good institutions, upon which depends the liberty and security of the king. The first of these is the parliament and its authority. For he who ordered that kingdom, and that is number 4, footnote 4, that is Charlemagne, right? Charlemagne. Um, uh, 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 see Discourses 1, chapter 16. Um, the Parliament of Paris was the court in Charlemagne's time, which the higher nobility was tried, right? The first of these is the Parliament and the authority, for he who ordered that kingdom, knowing the ambitions of the powerful and their insolence, insolence, and judging it necessary that they have a bit in their mouth to correct them. And on the other hand, knowing the hatred which is founded on fear by the universality for the great, and wishing to reassure them, there seems to be an ambiguity of who is the one being reassured, the people or the great, right? Does that be reassure them who is being the great or the people? He did not that this should want that this should be a particular concern of the king, and he sought to remove from himself any blame which he would receive from the great if he favored the people, and from the people if he favored the great. And he therefore constituted a third judge who would keep down the great and favor the small without placing any burden on the king. So therefore, this idea of the third judge, a third judge. In other words, this is the role that there's the people and the king doesn't. In other words, in this fight between the great and the people, he doesn't want to be careful. You can't make either one of them really enemies. So in other words, that he created the third judge, who didn't want the king to be involved. He created the third judge to be the judge involved in this decision, right? So that he created a third judge who would keep down the great and favor the small without placing any burden on the king. Nor could there be anything better than this ordinance, nor more prudent, nor was there a greater cause for the security of the king and his kingdom. So again, this is an interesting argument. The judge becomes an intermediary where he favors the small against the great. He burdens the great and benefits. In other words, he keeps down the great, prevents them from doing anything that harms, and then in favor of the small. Whence one may draw something else, which is noteworthy, that princes ought to let burdensome things be administered by others, and keep for themselves those which are of grace and favor. So burdensome things that will only get you hated and people get upset. Burdensome things, let other people do it. And keep for themselves those that are of grace and favor. In other words, that grant things, grant favors and grace. Anew, I conclude that a prince ought to esteem the great, but not make himself hated by the people. In other words, you should esteem the great, but don't make yourself hated by the people. How do you make the way that is? But well, you have to keep it down. So give the great honors, but don't let them become do anything to harm the people. Right? Hated. Don't make himself hated by the people. Now, right now we get to the emperors. Now this is this weird moment. It might perhaps appear to many, considering the life and death of some Roman emperors, that there might be examples contrary to my opinion. For they find someone who has always lived excellently and shown a great virtue of mind, and who nevertheless lost the imperium, or who was even murdered by his own who conspired against him. Wishing, therefore, to respond to these objections, I shall discuss the qualities of some emperors, showing the causes of their ruins, which are not different from those which have been alluded by me. And in part, I shall put in consideration of those things which are noticeable for him who reads the actions of those times. I wish to let it suffice to make those emperors who succeeded to the imperium from Marcus, the philosopher, to Maximus. These were Marcus, his son Commodus, Pertinax, just Julianus Severus, his son Antonio Car, Calara, Macrinus, Heliogabalus, Alexander, and Maximus. Now, this is always that pain in the ass moment. Why don't you just look at that thing here? Why don't you do this? Okay. Note 6. He gives all the emperors, right? He says that Marcius reigned from that. Commodus was assassinated by Marcia, his mistress, and Latius, the Praetorian prefect. Publicus Hevidius Paratax. Again, that's from Gladiator first. Publius Helivius Paratax was emperor from January to March. Marius Dildus Julianus was emperor March 28th, 193, from the Praetorian Guard in a marked auction, and was murdered June 1st. Lucius Septemberus Severus was acclaimed emperor on April 13th and died natural death in 2011, so a couple years. Marcus Aurelius Antonius Carilla was assassinated in 2017. Marcus Opella Marcus was the Praetorian prefect who assassinated Antonius out of fear, but was put to death in 2018, so it won't last a year. Heraclitus, born of Beroeus, was a hereditary priest of sun god. He was assassinated in 2022. Marcus Aurelius Severus Alexander, the reign of the reign name of Alexandrus was only 13 on his ascension, was already therefore under the influence of his mother, Julia Maxima. He was assassinated in 2035, so he was like a couple years. And Carius Vera Maximus was assassinated in 2013. Chapter 19 is the longest chapter of the Prince, and the longest chapter of Discourses is Book 3:6. Discourses 3:6, which also treats conspiracies. So conspiracies are the longest one. But the direct discussion of conspiracies is relatively brief here, as as it's probably must be the book addressed to princes who are very tender about this thing. The rest of the chapter deals with the question, with the objection which the reader might raise, that a prince of great virtue does not always securely establish himself. The issue seems to be the power of chance and the weakness of virtue. So therefore, this is really two chapters. The conspiracy chapter is small, and now he goes on to this discussion of the emperors about what? The question of virtue and the question of holding these things together. This is why this note is a huge note too. So this is one of those pains in the butt moment. In other words, that a prince of great virtue does not always securely establish himself. The issues here is the power of chance and the weakness of virtue. The examples of virtuous men overcoming chance would seem to be best found among the Roman emperors. And the rest of the chapter is a reserve of succession of the imperium from 161 AD to 238 AD. Machiavelli does not say why he chooses to discuss these particular period of Roman history. This is Tacidian, like Tacitus, I suspect. But in the Discourses 110, he tells that the reign of Marcus Aurelius was close to the golden age of the empire, right? And that period from chapter 19 is concerned, therefore, what immediately follows is the best of the empire, right? And Machiavelli is silent upon the most important subject of this period, the rise of Christianity, right? Gibbon, de Alvarez points to Gibbon. Gibbon goes on to relate the attraction of the emperor Julia Avira Mineris and her son Alexander to Christianity. Maximus, in excruciating Alexander's supporters, accidentally and briefly persecuted the Christians. But the story of Christianity from this time on, despite the severe precursions of Diocletian and some other emperors afterwards, is one of steady progress. One wonders, therefore, if Machiavelli chose this period to discuss, because he who reads the actions of these times would know that it was during these times that Christianity first gained the influence over the minds of the rulers of empire. So therefore, this is why this moment of time here, right? This bunch of empire is also the reign of the rise of Christianity in the empire, and that will later gain at the end of it will gain more, even though there's a slight backpedaling. But no, it is going to be a ever growing development. So let's continue to the text. And it is to be noted first that Whereas in other principates, one has only to contend with the ambition of the great and the insolence of the people. The Roman emperors had a third difficulty. So you had either the great traditional rules in most principates is either the ambitions of the great and the insolence of the people, right? The thirds had a Roman difficulty, having to bear with the cruelty and avarice of the soldiers. So the Roman emperors had three problems: not only the great, but in the indulgence of the people, but also the cruelty of the soul and the avarice of the soldiers. This was so difficult that it was the cause of ruin of many, since it was difficult to satisfy the soldiers and the people. And for the people love quiet and therefore love modest princes, and the soldiers love a prince of a warlike mind, and one who was insolent, cruel, and rapacious, which which things they wanted him to practice on the people in order to be able to double their stipends and give vent to their avarice and cruelty. So therefore, in other words, let's keep the soldiers happy. You can't. The people are the opposite. The soldiers and the people they want war. They want war. They want conflict, and they want their money, and they want to enjoy the things. And the people are going to, So therefore, you side with the soldiers, you get the people angry at your enemy. You side with the people, you get the enemy, the army, the soldiers at your enemy. These things made it such that those emperors were always ruined, who, by nature or by art, did not have a great reputation, such that they could hold in rein the soldiers and the people, most of them, especially those who came as new men to the Principate, knowing the difficulties of these two diverse humors, turned to satisfying the soldier, caring little about, in other words, injuring the people. In other words, the new people came new men to the prince. Especially, in other words, and most of them, especially those who came new men, knowing the difficulties of these two diverse humors, right, turned to satisfying the soldiers, little caring about injuring the people. The choice was necessary, for if the princes were not able to escape from being hated by somebody, they ought first try not to be hated by the general body. Okay, the general body, note 7. Universalis, right? Universalis, universe, the general body of the universe, the whole of all things, and therefore the extension of the body of the people. But it is also means any body of persons treated as a unity in law, for the example of the guild or corporation. Right? Again, see chapter 21. Right? This is the general body, hated by the universalis, hated by everybody. And when they are not able to achieve this, hated by the general body, the people in that sense, they ought to hated by everyone. They must try not to be hated by the general body. And when they contrive with all industry to, in other words, if they're not able to achieve this, they ought to contrive with all industry to avoid hated by those bodies that are the most powerful. So who are the most powerful? If the people have no power, being hated by, in other words, it's not only being hated, but hated by the people with power and the means to harm you. Hated by those bodies that are the most powerful. And therefore, those emperors, who because of their newness had need for extraordinary favors, adhered to the soldiers rather than the people. And this, therefore, turned out for them to be useful or not, according to whether the prince knew how to maintain his reputation with them. Okay, in other words, they preferred the soldiers because it was just, now the question is whether it was beneficial to them. and this nevertheless turned out for them to be useful or not, according to whether the prince know how to maintain his reputation with them. Right from these above mentioned causes, it proceeds that Marcus, Parallax, and Alexander, all being all of modest lives, lovers of justice, enemies of cruelty, human, benign, all except Marcus came to a sad end. Marcus alone lived and died exceedingly honored because he succeeded to the imperium by hereditary right, and he did not have to acknowledge receiving it either from the soldiers or from the people. Moreover, being accompanied by many virtues which made him venerated, he was always able, while he lived, to keep in order one of the factions, while the other was kept within limits. And he was never hated or despised. So he wasn't ever hated and despised by the universality. And he knew he had his virtues, in other words, his many virtues had made him venerated. And he was always, when he lived, he balanced the factions out. But Parallax was created emperor against the will of the soldiers, who, because they were used to living licentiously and commodious, could not bear the more honest life to which Parallax wished to recall them. And having created hatred for himself, and to this hatred there was an additional contempt of his old age, he was ruined at the very beginning of his administration. So he was old and frail. He wanted to make the soldiers honest, right? And since the soldiers were living licentiously and commodious, what happened that he was hated, and the weakness because the soldiers hated him because of two things. One, he didn't let them do what they wanted, and he was old, so he was contemptuous for his old age. So he's ruined at the beginning of his administration, and there one ought to know that hatred is acquired by good works as well as evil ones. Therefore, as I said above, a prince who wants to maintain the state is forced to be not good when that body which you choose, now the you here, I think is going to be the second person familiar is used here. You that body which you choose, you, I'm talking to you missed, the reader, choose to maintain you, because you have the need is corrupt. In other words, the body that you choose to maintain you, because you have the need of them, in that sense, is corrupt. Whether it be the people or the soldiers or the great, you must follow their humor to satisfy them. And when good works are your enemy, and then good works are your enemies. In other words, if whoever power is bringing you in, whatever the power you have to turn to, because you need that power. Either it be what he says, whoever, regardless, whether it be the people or the soldiers or the great. In other words, if that power that you need to turn to is corrupt, then good works are your enemy. But let us come to Alexander, who had so much goodness that among other praises that are attributed to him is this one, that during the 14 years that he had the imperium, no one was ever put to death without trial. Nevertheless, he was held to be effeminate, and a man who lets himself be governed by his mother. Remember, he was made king, he was made emperor young, right? And his mother and he came to be despised because of this. The army conspired against him and killed him. So that the army, because his mother, he often let his mother make his decisions, he looked effeminate, a man who let himself be governed by his mother. And the soldiers saw this was as contemptible, and they turned. In other words, he sided with the people. He put no one to death. He was just, good. He had the good qualities, but he's the soldiers. And the soldiers looked at him, and because he was contemptible in their eyes, they turned on him and killed him. Now discussing now in contrast the qualities of Commodus, Severus, Antonius Cruella, and Maximus. You again. I think this is now again the you here. I wonder if we shift it. The you here is the courteous. In other words, talking about these evil people. Now it's courteous, not the familiar. Is used. Second person is used. So he switches from intimate, that what you are forced to do. Now these people, these in contrast to these guys, again they're bad guys, right? They're not. Are different. I don't want to say bad guys, but they're Commodus, Severus, Antonius Cruellus, and Maximus. You will find them exceedingly cruel and rapacious. In order to satisfy their soldiers, they did not fail to inflict upon the people every kind of injury, and all of them except Severus ended badly. So everyone but Severus, all these except Severus, they let they to satisfy their soldiers, they did not fail to inflict upon the people every kind of injury, and all the men badly except Severus. For in Severus there was so much virtue. Whoa. What? There was so much virtue that maintaining the soldiers friendly. But wait a minute, you just said they were increasingly rapacious and cruel. Letting them do everything. So this virtue, maintaining the soldiers friendly, even though the people were burdened by him, he was always able to rule happily. For his virtues made him so wonderful in the view of the soldiers and of the people that the former remained in a certain way. Okay, this is interesting. Astonished and stupefied. Remember the last time that there was someone who was satisfied and stupefied was the example of Cesare Borgia leaving Marco Diorco in the piazza cut in half with the knife and the bloody knife and the bloody stick, right? Literally cut in half, bloody knife and bloody stick. That's satisfied and stupefied. Here they're astonished and stupefied. Okay, and the others reverent and satisfied. So one people astonished and stupefied. Who's this first one? The soldiers. The soldiers are astonished and stupefied. In other words, because there's viciousness is such that they're left astonished and stupefied. His virtues left in that sense. See, what is the virtues here? What are the virtues? I wonder. Are the virtues ruthlessness and Hannibalist cruelty? Um, and then the people are reverent and satisfied. Remember that it was the stupefied, satisfied, right? So this is the Romalia example, are both present, but the people are satisfied, and the soldiers are stupefied, astonished and stupefied, and reverent and satisfied. And because the action of this man's was so great and notable of a new prince, I would like to show briefly how well he knew how to use the persona of the fox and the lion. So he's gonna, oh my God, go back to the previous chapter, lion and fox. He knew how to be what? He's a great example of a new prince. A new prince. Well, back to chapter 4. New prince that he would like to. I would like to show briefly how he knew well how to use the persona of the fox and the lion, which are the natures I've said I said above, a prince must are necessary for a prince to imitate. Right? These are the things that a prince must imitate. Severus knew that the indolence of Emperor Julianus. He knew of the indolence of Emperor Julianus. He persuaded the army, of which he was the captain in Savonia, that it would be good to go to Rome and avenge the death of Parallax, whom the Praetorian Guard had killed. Under this color, without showing any aspirations for the imperium, he moved his army against Rome and was in Italy before his departure was known. After his arrival in Rome, he was elected emperor by the Senate through fear, and Julianus was murdered. After this beginning, there remained two difficulties for Severus, if he wished to make himself master of the whole state. One in Asia, where Niger, head of the Asiatic armies, had called himself emperor, and the other in the west, where there was Albinus, who also conspired to the imperium. So these two competitors, because he judged it dangerous to discover himself an enemy to both at once, he decided to attack Niger and to deceive Albinus. He wrote a letter that, since he had been elected emperor by the Senate, uh, 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 um, he wanted to share his dignity with him, and he sent him the title of Caesar and took him as a colleague by the resolution of the Senate. Okay, so he sent to Albinus a letter saying, "Well, I'm going to make you Caesar. I'm going to give you a Caesar." Then I sent him the title of Caesar and took him as a colleague, right, by the resolution of the Senate. These things were accepted by Albinus as truth. But after Severus had conquered and murdered Niger and pacified affairs in the east, he returned to Rome and complained to the Senate that Albinus little recognized the benefits received by him, had treacherously sought to kill him, and that he was necessary to go and punish this ingratitude. And when he and then he went to find him in France and took from him his state and his life. So okay, this is so what he did is he did what? He used the lion against. Uh, 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 he used the fox to come into power, getting majesty. He then used the lion against Niger, and then the fox against uh, 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 Albinus. And then when Niger was dealt with, he then used the lion against Albinus after deceiving the Senate, right? He who will examine in detail the actions of this man will find him the most ferocious lion and the most austere fox. He will see him feared and revered by everyone, and not hated by the armies. So he's feared and revered by everyone, not hated by the armies, and one will not wonder that he, a new man, was able to keep so much imperium. For his very great reputation always protected him from the hatred which the people might have contrived because of her rapacity. It was just things were now, but the problem is, but Antonius's son was also a man of most excellent. But Antonius's son was also a man of most excellent parts, who made himself marvelous in the view of the people and pleasing to the soldiers. For he was warlike man, exceedingly able to endure toil. He scorned all delicate foods and softness, and this made him loved by all the armies. Nevertheless, his ferocity and cruelty were so great and so unheard of, by having, after infinite individual slayings, murdered a great part of the people of Rome and all those of Alexandria, that he became extremely hateful to all the world. So, in other words, though he was Antonius' son, the father did one thing: he didn't become hated by everyone. But Antonius becomes, because of what? His ferocity and cruelties were so great and so unheard of, infinite slaying and murdering of people in Rome and those of Alexandria. He became so hateful to all the world. And he began to fear also. He began to be feared also by those he had around him. And in such a mode, he was killed by a centurion in the midst of his army. In other words, that even those around him, because he was so cruel and arbitrary, that he became, everyone feared the moment that he could turn against him in that sense. Something his father did not have. He became universally hated and feared in that sense. Hateful of the word. And he became feared, that everyone feared that around him. Also by those he had around him, right? In such a mode, he was killed by a centurion. Whence it is to be noted that murders such as these, which follow from the deliberation of an obstinate mind, are unavoidable for a prince. In other words, it is noted that murders such as these, which follow from the deliberations of an obstinate mind, are unavoidable for a prince. For anyone who does not care about dying can do him harm. In other words, I'm sorry, if no one doesn't care about dying, they'll kill you. They'll sacrifice themselves. But since such cases are extremely rare, it is well for a prince to have littlest fear of them. In other words, okay, that's a weird thing he says. That he says the murders of these kind, the people who just killed that like this, you can't stop them. These are rare. That they follow from a deliberation, opposite mind, who are unable and are unavoidable by princes. You can't avoid them in that sense. If someone who doesn't care about dying and can do him harm, this will happen. They have nothing to lose. They fear you or hate you so much, they have nothing to lose and nothing to fear. They will act. And they will do it in months. These things, and you can't really stop it. But they're so rare that a prince should. It is well for a prince to have little fear of them. He ought only to guard against in not doing grave injury to anyone who serves him, or those whom he has around him in the service of the Principate, as Antonius had done, who murdered in a So what does Antonius? Why did Antonius do? What did Antonius do? Well, not only killed everyone, he was killing people left and right, but he did what? He harmed people who was so what is it? Around, in other words, or those around him in the service of the Principate, as Antonius had done, who had murdered in a disgraceful way a brother of that centurion, and then also threatened the man himself daily, while still keeping him as a bodyguard. And it was a rash policy, and such as to bring ruin, has happened to him. So look at this. It's completely not. He harmed someone, and then what? And threatened him daily, but still kept him as a bodyguard? So this is inherit. This person is not a new prince, but he's an inherited prince, Antonius. His father was a new prince, but Antonius is his successor. Now the other successor is Commodus, right? Commodus is the son of Antonius. But let us come to Commodus, from whom it was very easy to keep the imperium. Who was the son of Marcus, who had it. Marcus had it by hereditary right, as the son of Marcus had it by hereditary right, and it would have sufficed him only to have followed in the footsteps of his father to satisfy the soldiers and the people. But since he had a cruel and bestial mind, so he had a cruel and bestial mind, not the mind of his father. In order to practice his rapacity on the people, he turned to indulging the armies and making them licentious. So he had a cruel this mind that was cruel, rapacious, and they turn the army loose, making them licentious. And on the other hand, and not keeping his dignity. In other words, at the same time, he didn't keep his dignity, descending into the theater to fight with gladiators, and doing other things most base and little worthy of imperial majesty. He became contemptible in the sight of the soldiers. So he let them get their way. He satisfied them, let them be vicious and nasty, destroyed it. But at the same time, by becoming fighting in the gladiatory, he became contemptible in their eyes, right? Doing other base things. So, and since he was hated on the one hand and despised on the other, he was conspired against and murdered. There remains to the narrative to narrate the qualities of Maximus. He was exceedingly bellicose man, so this bellicose man. And since the armies were wearied of the softness of Alexander, which I have discussed above, murdering him, they elected Maximus to the imperium. He did not he did not long possess it, because two things made him hated and contemptible. One, the extreme baseness of his origins. He formerly herded sheep in Trace. This is very well known to all and made him greatly despised in the sight of everyone. The other, his having deferred going to Rome to take possession of the imperial see at the beginning of his principate. And he gained for himself the opinion that he was exceedingly cruel, having through his prefects in Rome and every part of the empire practiced many cruelties. So his officials did this, like again, Caesare Borgia, right? Moment. So he did not go to Rome immediately, didn't go there. He was base, he was from a low background, didn't go to Rome, and he was, his ministers, his magistrates, he got a reputation of cruelty through having his prefects in Rome and other parts of the empire practice cruelties, such that the whole world, moved by disdain for his baseness of his blood, and the hatred which arose from fear of his ferocity. For Africa first rebelled, and then the Senate with all the peoples of Rome, and all Italy conspired against him. His own army joined these. It was besieging Anquilla and finding it difficult to conquer. Disgusted with his cruelty, seeing that he had so many enemies, it came to fear him less and killed him. So therefore, this is that moment here. Now he goes, I do not wish to reason about either Heliogabalus or Macrinus or Julianus, who, by being wholly contemptible, were immediately extinguished. But I shall come to the conclusion of this discourse. In other words, he's going to come to the conclusion of this discourse. And I shall say that princes of our times have less of this difficulty of satisfying the excessive demands of the soldiers in their governments. In other words, the princes of our time don't have the same problem as the Roman emperors, because the soldiers of this, because notwithstanding that they have to show them such consideration, yet the difficulty is quickly resolved, for none of these princes has armies which are altogether deeply rooted in the government and administration of the provinces, as were the armies of the Roman Empire. The armies that deep in the administrative processes tied to the administration of the territorium. The army so deep in the administration of the governance of the provinces as the empire was. And therefore it was necessary to satisfy the soldiers more than the people. It was because the soldiers could do more than the people. And now it is more necessary for all the princes, except the Turk and the Sultan, to satisfy the people rather than the soldiers, because the people can do more than these, right? So that in the modern world, the people are more powerful than the soldiers. And therefore they need to satisfy the people and the soldiers. The exception to this is the Turk and the Sultan. Sultan is Sultan of Egypt, which then ruled Malmaduks. The Turk is probably referred to as Selim I. Selim I marched on Egypt and annexed it to the Ottoman Empire. The state of the Sultan is that of the Caliphate, the spiritual authority of Islam, and the which Selim took over, thus combining the person of the Turkish Sultan, both temporal power and spiritual power. Selim I was praised in the Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 19, where the context was that of the difficulties of providing for the succession. The comparison between the cephalate and the pontificate leads inevitably to the same question of whether or not it is possible for the pontificate to become like the cephalate, especially after the enterprises of the Bulgars and Julius II, which gave the church temporal powers. But this is where the note ends, and this is that weird thing, this idea of the church, and this is why he gives us the move here, right? And you, again, you is a wonderful, what is it? Who's the you here? Is it the second courteous, the courteous? So it's the um, it's the more formal, not formal, but more, yeah, it's a proper, it's showing reverence, right? And you have to know that this state of the Sultan is different from all other principates because it is similar to the Christian pontificate, because it is similar to the Christian pontificate, which one cannot call either a hereditary principate or a new principate. For it is not the sons of the old principate who are the heirs and remain lords, but he who is elected to that rank by those who have authority, right? So therefore, the Sultan is different from all other principates, but similar to he's not elected. He doesn't. It's not inherited in a direct sense, but elected, right? And therefore, this is churches. What he says about this, about the Sultan, should give us cause to understand why Borgia, what Alexander did, and what was Alexander tried to do, and what Julius accomplished was why. And then the disaster of what happens with Leo, right? Who have authority. And since this order is ancient, one cannot call it a new principate. So it's not a new principate. This Sultanic, the Sultan or order, or the pontifical order is not ancient. Since this order is ancient, one cannot call it a new principate. For one finds there none of the difficulties of these new. Remember back to that weird ecclesiastical chapter in chapter 11 of the Prince, the ecclesiastical principates, right? Yeah, chapter 11 of the Prince, that beginning of that ecclesiastical principates. So the order is ancient, one cannot call it a new principate, but one finds therein none of the difficulties new ones have. For though the prince is new, the orders of the state are in order and ordained to receive him as if he were their hereditary lord. So this is that point. Now he goes, but let us return to our matter. Now this is a weird motor. There was number 12. That the significance of on the significance of discretion. Let's return to the matter. I had a big digression. Now I say that whomever will conspire, I will say whoever will consider the discourses written above will see that either hatred or disdain was the cause of the ruin of the emperors named above. And he will also know how it came about that though part of them proceed in one mode and part proceed in one mode and part in the contrary, whichever mode they proceed in, that one of them came to be happy and the other to unhappy end. So therefore, two modes. So in other words, they either gain hatred or disdain. But we'll see that either hatred or disdain was the cause of ruin of them. If they became hated and resistant, if they became hated, those emperors that became hated or held contemptible, they were destroyed easily. They were destroyed. Came to ruin. But those who were not they were not hated and contained and able to achieve greatness, were able to avoid it, right? So, how it came about that though one part of them proceeded in one mode, the other part contrary, whichever mode they proceed in, that the one that came to be happy and the other unhappy. For Parallax and Alexander, since they were new princes, it was useless and harmful to wish to imitate Marcus, who came to the principate by hereditary right. And similarly for Carolus, Commodus, and Maximus, it was a pernicious thing to imitate Severus, since they did not have sufficient virtue to follow in his footsteps. So, in other words, the other ones who were, in other words, if you were a new guy, you can't follow. If you're a new prince, you can't follow Marcus, who's the hereditary prince. Sorry, and the other ones, you didn't have the virtues of the guy to follow in his footsteps. Let's go look at no. Let's go back and look for a second. In other words, that Caleres, Commodus, and Maximus, it was a pernicious thing to imitate Severus, even though they come out of order, and there's no way that Commodus could have didn't know Severus, right? So therefore, he couldn't do that same thing Severus did. Why? Because Commodus lacked the virtue, Severus's virtue to follow in his footsteps. Therefore, a new prince in a new principate cannot imitate the actions of Marcus, nor is it even necessary to follow those of Severus. But he ought to take from Severus those parts which are necessary to found a state, and from Marcus those which are fitting and glorious to preserve a state that has been already firm. In other words, but treat them as, again, Severus is fox. Severus is said to be both cunning fox and cunning lion. Marcus is only seems to be a lion, right? That therefore the lion qualities fitting, in other words, fitting what is fitting and glorious to preserve a state that has always been established and firm. If you're going to establish, in other words, a state that's established, like the pontificate, follow Marcus. If it is established, either like the pontificate or the sultanate, because of ancient orders, and it's all established, even if I'm new. But if I'm just new, then I need to follow Severus. Why? Because I have to play lion and fox, right? I need to have from Severus those parts that are necessary to found a state. And from Marcus, which does what? The lion to make it fitting and glorious to preserve it. And this is where we end it. It's been a long chapter. I think people saying, "Oh God, how long could this be?" So if this ends the last section of that third section. The qualities of the prince, and from this point on, we'll go to a new debate, a new section, the next, which deals with the quality of the prince. So I'll stop it right here. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below, and I'll respond to them. If you like the video, hit the like button, please. It helps the algorithm. It helps the algorithm, a lot. If you didn't like it, you can always say no, but say why. Explain why. Engagement helps. Comments and things. Engagement helps algorithm. If you liked it, share it far and wide. Share it on your social media. Share it with your friends. Bring attentions. If you know someone who might be interested in what we do here and to find the prince, go bring it. Hey, go this channel is doing the prince. Go read it. So go check out check out the different videos I've done. The Prince, Schmidt, Aristotle, Montesquieu, Rousseau, so on and so forth. Go check it out. So, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. It helps grow the channel somewhere. We're trying to get that magic number by the end of the summer. Another thing you can do is, you want to check out my social media links, you can go check them out there. The links to social media, follow me on social media and check me out. I'm not always there always, but you can follow me on Twitter. That's a good way. The other thing you can do is you can follow my academic social media. The academic social media links are below the social media links. You want to know more about me as a scholar, check out my research, check out what my scholarship is, that kind of stuff is. There, it's there. The links are there to those academic social media sites. The next but not least but not next, next but not least, whatever, is if you want to help me, you want to contribute to what I do and help me do it. You can do so by being a patron or a supporter through subscribe star or Patreon. Either way, it'd be nice. It can be possible. So please check out either mechanism, or you can buy one of my books. You can help us. Just the other way you can do so is by checking out the book. There's a list of my books beneath the URLs to those two those sites. There's the list of the books that are questioned. You can order it through your local bookstore, or you can order it through an online distributor like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Libris, or whatever. Or you can order it through the publishers directly themselves. Well, that's it. We'll stop here. This has been the longest chapter of The Prince. Next time we do, we'll look at the new things, the question of virtue, the virtue of the prince. Not virtue of the prince, but prudence, the question of prudence and judgment of the prince, and the test of this kind of test chapter. So looking at chapter 20 in that sense. Take care, bye-bye, and have a good day.